Okay, I'm going to do something a little different, which is kind of a follow-up video to my first one as to why I moved away from the other format. I saw some comments in my comments section. Some people are disappointed with that and so forth. And I do have some regrets for, not providing the entertainment that you're hoping for. But the problem is, I feel like two things. First of all, I feel like I proved what I had to prove with regards to the format over the last few seasons. And secondly, at the end of the day, as much as I like, you know, trying to create content for y'all, I need to enjoy myself while I'm doing it. This is not a job; it's a hobby for me, and I simply don't enjoy the Commander format. So this isn't an argument as to whether or not the format's better one way or the other. I like a certain style of gameplay. I like formats where ancestral recall are legal the most, which currently is only one format. But given that ancestral recall is probably never going to be legal in Commander, personally, just so you know, my preferred version of Commander would be all cards are unbanned. Period. I think that would be far more interesting. And I wouldn't even mind if you got rid of the color rule and allowed, say, somebody who wants to play their red to ready commander deck and try to do it with like Goblin Welder and through and blue cards. Like let's say they like I want to build a Duretti deck, but I want to build a Duretti deck with like I want to have intuition and I want to have like thirst for knowledge and I want to play factor fiction so I can put cards in my graveyard that I can recur with my Duretti and played like a classic blue-red, I don't know, stacks or Mindslaver lock deck or a combo deck. Like I would be totally for that format. Nothing's banned. Go to town and have a blast. Basically a fixed vintage. But since we don't get that, what I always loved about Commander, I used to play incidentally, a 100 card singleton and switched to Commander specifically because the ban list was opened up a little bit more and you could play cards like Soul Ring and such. And I like the challenge of fighting against it. I like the mental challenge of preparing to deal with it and also trying to make sure I can advantage it. And I like the fact that it also fixes a lot of things that where the game would actually bend too far in a different direction without those cards, in my opinion. So I'm going to talk about why I have those opinions. So that's how I feel. So if you want to argue with how I feel, you won't get very far because those are my feelings. Now your feelings may differ, and that's totally understandable. But the why of it, if you want to see what I'm talking about, I think that's a conversation certainly worth having if you're interested. And so I'm going to at least do my part and present what I see from my perspective in this video. So first of all, the ban list is extremely long for Commander. It might not look like it, but it's actually an incredibly large number of cards, all things considered. It's a very long ban list, and I think that the reason it's so long is because, well, it's one of two things. See, what they're doing, in my opinion, and this may be intentional and it may be accidental. That this part I don't know. But what they're doing is, well, I was gonna try to copy paste it and draw it all out, but I don't. It'd take too long. So anyway, they've taken a format that had it had a natural feel to it, a natural play to it, and they've redefined it as another format. And this other format is it's more different. The difference between the Commander as they've defined it in this 1v1 matches and Commander as it is in multiplayer, the difference is greater than the differences between actual Legacy and Type 1. Because in Legacy, you still have decks running around with four forces of will, just like you do in Type 1. And their basic game plan is roughly the same. They're either an aggro deck that's going to try to kill you with force of will back up to buy time, or they're a control deck that's going to try to get card advantage and lock you out with force of will to prevent them from losing before they can establish their game plan. In Legacy, you have workshops decks. They don't actually have workshops, but they have quite a few other lands. They have, for example, Eldrazi, the Eldrazi lands to have Eldrazi threats, Ancient Tombs, City of Traders, and a bunch of other cards that they can use to basically play colorless, overcosted stuff for a discount price using overpowered lands. That same deck exists in Vintage, just a different form. There's a Dredge deck in Legacy. There's a Dredge deck in Vintage, and so on and so forth. So that everywhere that you can have a copy, you have Oath deck in Vintage, and in Legacy, what you have is Show and Tell. So both of the decks are possible of easily getting a turn 2 Emrakul, for example, or Grizzlebrand. So again, there's a ton of similarities, much more so between Legacy and Vintage than there is between current Commander and the other version, 1v1 Commander. So the first thing you notice with this huge ban list is that they've changed the format tremendously. With that many cards, it couldn't be otherwise. Secondly, if you look through it, I think there's a grand total of 5 or 6 green cards on here, and something like 15 blue cards roughly. So it's effectively a 3-to-1 ratio between blue to green cards. And so this is the next point I want to get to. There's a bias in what they're banning. Now, I didn't count cards that have both blue and green in them, like the Revi, since it's kind of a wash. So just talking about individual cards. But there's a bias in their tuning of this format. And the bias is against blue and for green, which is a very strange thing because unlike 20 years ago when green was probably the worst color in the game, or fighting for that title. Green now is the second best color in Magic, and it has been for a long time. And it's almost like they started at one point. The people who've been in this game for all this time, they started developing to fix a problem, and they just kept fixing what isn't broken anymore. And in fact, not modern, but formats without quality counters, which is what standard has been for ages and ages, green is better than blue. And green has been better than blue for a long time. In fact, the blue strategies in standard often end up being support strategies for green aggression or for green combo, etc. So at least from what I know, which is admittedly not that much about standard, but from the little bit I've been able to glean from just keeping an eyeball on it, waiting for them to print counters so I could actually play standard again. So anyway, so the ban list, it's huge, it's extensive, and it's a 3-to-1 bias towards green and against blue. And I want to talk about some of those specific biases now. So I'm going to bring up something, because here's some arguments I've heard. I've heard arguments that the tutors are too good. So here's a list of banned tutors. Now, funny enough, a lot of these are not blue, as you can see. Personal tutors legal, for example. That fairly terrible card, but I suppose playable. However, they're often used in blue decks, and so even when they're not specifically targeting blue, a lot of the damage that they're inflicting is still going to be on blue decks, because the majority, somewhere between all and almost all blue decks, are going to be playing the black tutors and other black cards. But anyway, let's take a look. So Imperial Seal, Vampiric Tutor, Mystical, Enlightened. So if your argument is that it's too good to be able to go get a card of your choice as a sorcery, but here we can do it with Sylvan Tutor. We can't Mystical or Enlighten for limited tutor effects at 1 mana, but we can go ahead and Worldly Tutor and Summoner's Pact for 0 or 1 mana. That's totally fine. I can we can also crop rotation for any land that we want, so we can go get any creature or any land on our first turn, no problem. I can go get an enchantment by grabbing a little bit of white and staying with green, of course, though. I can go get any creature and put it directly into my hand, just like a Demonic Tutor, except I can do it at instant speed after I see what you did. I can repeatedly tutor for creatures with Fauna Shaman. I can go get any card that's already been played, so I can basically tutor from my graveyard, and there's so many ways to do that in green. I just took one of them out. I can repeatedly put creatures into play directly, repeatedly fetch for lands. I can repeatedly go get more creatures again that are undercosted. because I'm only actually spending 1 mana to put, 4, 5, 6 drops into play, 7 drops, depending on who my commander is and, what I'm sacrificing. Here again, I have a reusable to X-Spell Tutor. And here I have another card that provides basically 2 extra mana when I actually activate it. This card, arguably I think is totally fine. And in fact, all these cards, in my opinion, are fine, but so are these. That's the point I'm making. Here's almost 15 to 5 in terms of fetching. You say, well, this is restricted to creatures and lands and enchantments, I guess. But that's what green does. So like blue tutors for blue creatures wouldn't even slightly make any sense, right? The fact that green tutors for green creatures, which is its strong suit, so green's getting its best cards, these tutors over here let you get your best cards too to keep up. And all you got to do is use 5 tutors over here to keep pace with 13 tutors over here. It's a very strange thing, but alas, these 5 cards, these are banned because they're too good, because they're pro-blue, anti-green. They're not green. So then we look at the fast mana. We got Workshop, Crypt, Soul Ring, and Vault Ban. Funny enough, everyone can play these cards. So everyone can play them. There's no reason not to include them in your deck. Nobody gets an unfair advantage. If your argument was, well, only black players get a Demonic Tutor, what's the argument against these cards? Well, they're just too good. They're just too fast. Well, I can get 4 mana on turn 2 with an Exploration, no problem. Say, well, you have to have 4 lands. Well, that's not entirely true, because I can have a Quirion Ranger, and I could have any of the creature. I could have a Sylvan Ranger. I believe it's Sylvan Ranger, and I can repeatedly play the same land over and over while untapping Mana Dorks and actually generate 5 mana on turn 2 with an Exploration, without having that many lands. Or I can use Earthcraft and I can generate 1 mana for every creature and creature token that I have in play endlessly. Like super, super broken. Or I can just tap my Bloom Tender along with my commander who costs, 3 different colors, or is 4 different colors, or 5 different colors, and easily tap for 5, 4, 3, 2 mana off of a card. Same with Priest of Titania and Elvish Archdruid in the right scenario. Growing Rites of Itlimoc works as a tutor, a dig, like a Ponder or Preordain, and also works as a super mana producer under the right conditions. Again, I'm not saying these cards are too good, but what I'm saying is that here's 4 ways that everyone was able to keep pace with green's massive mana production, and I'm not touching any. If you notice, these are all cards that have the potential to make multiple mana early, versus I didn't touch any of the Birds of Paradise, Noble Hierarch, none of that stuff. So setting all those cards aside, where you get 3 mana on turn 2. Basically, if you're a green player and you don't have 3 mana on turn 2, you might consider mulliganing. That's how insane it is. So when you go first on turn 2, you have 300, 3 times the mana that the other player has. You have triple their mana. And so if you were the green player and you went first turn Mana Elf and I went first turn Soul Ring, I've got 3 mana in play, and on your second turn you have 3 mana in play, and I'm keeping pace with you. And of course, disregarding the fact that you could also be the green player running this stuff out. But these are all banned. And I think the reason that they're banned is the problem isn't that these are too fast to mana. And they are. They're great. They're really powerful. You get to do sick, absurd, fun things with them sometimes. But we all know what they are. We all know how to target them. We're all ready to go if we've built our decks correctly to deal with these cards. And we all get to use them. So for me, to me, that would be the argument for why they're fine. But having said that, the biggest problem as I see it is that blue decks play these cards. And blue decks typically aren't playing these cards. Outside of blue-green, which is okay. So if you're green anything, that's fine. But if you're blue anything, that's bad. Unless it's blue-green, which is fine, because now you're blue. So this is my argument. Let's look at these cards. Sensei's Divining Top, Ponder, Preordain, Brainstorm. I mean, the first argument for top, is too slow. What is the argument for Preordain? Why is Preordain banned? What does it do? It scries 2 and draws 1 card? Look at Ancient Stirrings, Traverse the Ulvenwald, Oath of Nissa. These cards dig deeper. This is 5 cards deep. 5 cards deep. Oh, wait, no. Traverse the Ulvenwald, is search your library. This goes as deep as you want, and occasionally is just another tutor I can put over here. Oath of Nissa digs, what is it, top 3 cards there? But it gets me creature, land, or planeswalker. So just basically Oath of Nissa is a preordain, because most of the time, if I'm keeping a hand with just island preordain, I'm keeping it because I don't want a mulligan, and I'm hoping, and if I don't have land in my top 3, then maybe I'll have one in the next card. Oath of Nissa is very similar, except you don't miss. I mean, if you don't get a land, you're going to get a creature, almost certainly in a green deck, right? And it digs you down and helps you keep. So these cards are basically equivalent or near equivalent, and yet these cards are all banned. Miri's Guile, a reusable Sensei's Divining Top. Cream of the Crop, a reusable Sensei's Divining Top effect. Is it as good? No, it's not as good. Can you play this in your green deck? Yes, you can. So what's the problem? However, the real issue, of course, is the decks that really need these cards are blue, and we don't like blue because green has all the effects. I didn't even touch Sylvan or Life from the Loam yet. See, green has a bunch of effects to mimic all the stuff that's banned over here on the right. Green can do it. And the problem is we don't want anyone else but green to do this stuff for cheap. I mean, if blue's going to play an over-expensive tutor, then, that's fine. There are a few. Now, don't get me wrong. They did leave a very tiny handful of cards, like they left Impulse at 2 mana rather than 1. They left, Merchant Scroll and a couple of other cards where blue has some very mild deck searching capabilities left. But then you can also say that there are cards I didn't include in here on the green side as well. So I didn't include Sylvan Scrying, and I didn't include a whole bunch of cards on the green side. On blue, you've got Whir of Invention. On green, you've got Court of Calling, so I considered that to be a wash, and I didn't include it here as well. I'm trying to be fair, but I'm just not seeing what other people seem to be saying. So let's say, how about this? Here's some cards that occasionally, under the right circumstances, will draw in one case 3 cards and in another 2 cards with some card selection, and they'll do it for cheap under the right circumstances. Not early, especially not without the cards that are banned, but you can do it. Here's some cards that under the right circumstances will draw 3 cards repeatedly. Here's a card that under the right circumstances, that being you have enough life to pay for it, which you start with 30, so I don't see why you're not, will allow you to draw 2 additional cards with deck selection as well, just like Dig, except repeatedly. These are permanent sources. These are one-time deals. These you can start doing as early as turn 2. These you can theoretically do on turn 2, but realistically you're not going to do until somewhere around turn 4 or 5. These are banned because they're not green. These are green, so these are good. Over here we've got, oh wait, no, that was all of our, oh yeah, and of course this card mimics Sylvan Sensei's Divining Top. Not only does it give you the card selection, but also more than just the card, many cards. Again, it's okay because it's green, it's not one of the other colors, otherwise we'd have to ban it. And then over here we've got, here's a card that they said, oh, this is too good because, it's a big swing. At 5 mana, it's too swingy. At 6 mana, though, you can go ahead and play a card that's like with Treachery. If I take your guy and then you kill the creature I took because you don't have a way to kill Treachery, so let's say you kill the creature, I just 2-for-1 you. If I play Primeval Titan and then you kill Primeval Titan with a card from your hand, you're down a card and I'm down a Titan, so that's a break even. I'm up 2 cards. If I use Treachery, you're down a card, 2 cards, and I'm down 1, so I'm up 1 card. In other words, what I'm saying is, here's a 5 mana swingy play that gives you +1 card advantage and some mana advantage on the turn you use it. Here's a 6 mana threat that gives you some, oh, and this also has some requirements, like, you need something to target. I've had games where I'm sitting with Treachery going, boy, I wish my opponent would play something that is good but not too good, because I don't want it to be, I don't want him to play a card that says, when it comes into play, break my back, right? So anyway, I don't want him to play Notion Thief in response to Brainstorm or something, right? Because treacherying that after the fact isn't so great. So anyway, let's compare that to Primeval Titan, which is totally fine because, it's not blue. And generates you additional mana, tons of extra mana, reusable, of course, because, if we're going to do good stuff, we want to make sure that you can do it over and over, not just one shot. And let's take a look. every card over here, so that is 28 cards I identified as comparable or similar in style or substance or effect or reusably broken or whatever the case is. There's 28 cards there, and there's 16 cards over here, many of which you could actually play in your green deck, but which tend to favor blue because green doesn't need this. Why? Because of this and a whole bunch of other cards that green has. And tell me there's no bias. There's no bias. These are all legal. None of these are banned. So there's triple the banned blue cards, and all the effects, all the arguments for this does X, Y, or Z over here. On the other side, I can find you a card that does something just as much or more, maybe less consistently or whatever. Maybe it takes a turn extra to ramp up. Maybe that's why it's okay. I don't know. Maybe, Worn Power Stone is okay, but Soul Ring is not for a reason, right? But that's the conversation I would prefer to have, not the conversation that, these cards are broken because they do whatever. I'd say if everyone can use them, what's the problem? If Mana Crypt was a blue card, if it required you to be playing blue cards specifically, then I would say, yeah, that seems a little bit absurd, right? Which is exactly why I think Ancestral Recall is a little bit absurd. Like, in the format I propose, it would be great. But in the current format, it's a little bit absurd, right? So, because everyone's not able to play it because of the color rules. If the color rule was gone, then I wouldn't have a problem with Ancestral in the format because everybody could play Ancestral in the format. And so, I just don't get it. I don't see how this makes any sense. And what it does ultimately at the end of the day for me is that when I can't play with any of this stuff here, my deck loses so much consistently. And primarily, my problem is, and you notice I played the format without this stuff here. I played the format when all this was banned. It was painful and it was difficult, but it was doable. I put in a bunch of alternate stuff. I lowered my curve. I had to change what I was doing. But when you ban all this stuff over here and you tell me I get no deck consistency in a format that's basically a 100-card singleton, but the green player can have as much consistency and speed as they like, not a problem. Then my only options at that point are to switch to green or quit playing the format. And that's what I decided to do, because I'm not playing the format because I want to win all the time. Like, that's not, winning is a byproduct of doing what I want, which is enjoying myself playing blue. That's what I like to do. And blue's been hated out of most of the current formats for a very long time now. So I honestly am like surprised that they haven't more aggressively tackled it in the older formats. However, if you look at the fact that Mishra's Workshop's unbanned and Dredge is running rampant and Oath is crazy, which is hardly a blue deck. It is, but it isn't. It's certainly not a control deck. If you look at the decks that do really, really well in old formats, what you'll see is that they make it almost impossible, if not impossible, to play control. And if you look at what wins, you'll consistently see it's not control anymore. So I really think that even though there's the illusion that since Force of Will, for example, is legal in older formats, that they like that blue is the strongest color, I don't even think, I think it still is the strongest color, but I don't think that the control strategy is good in just about any format anymore. And for me, that's very disappointing, because that's how I like to play Magic. And I honestly believe, just from the evidence of the last 20 plus years, that Wizards does not like control for whatever reason. They don't like to play it, they don't like to support it, or they just don't want it to be a viable option for whatever reason. And they've gotten a hold of Commander and done the same thing to that. So I promise you some games. I am going to run some games here, but that's it for the discussion. This is what I see as far as the bias. Now, I haven't even touched some of the other control cards. So here's some other control cards that are banned that, again, make little to no sense to me. So tell me, who do these cards hurt the most? Does it hurt the blue control deck? Who does it hurt the most? It hurts green the most. The number one color, out there gets hosed the most by this. Red, of course, has a really rough time with these cards, but red can go over the top of them with direct damage to the face. Black may be hurt by these cards, but black can easily be played as a control strategy and or a combo deck, and so there's no guarantee that it's going to be hurt. White has quite a few ways to remove this, as does green these days. They gave basically green as many or more. So funny enough, even though these hurt green, they don't hurt green as much as they used to. There's certainly no guaranteed of a win like it was 20 years ago. And the other thing is that the only reason humility hurts green more than it hurts white is because white's removal for moat and humility tends to be non-creature based, and green's removal for humility tends to be creature based, and that's prevented by the humility effect itself. So basically what I'm getting at is not only did they remove all these cards here, but they also took out a couple of cards that might make their favorite color struggle a little bit, because we can't have that. We couldn't possibly allow cards that would make it possible for you to beat the green deck easily. That's just not good. And I honestly believe, sarcasm aside, that this is a result of whatever misguided or not, correct or not, I don't know, but I suspect that there's a belief internally that sort of your broad-based population for Magic prefers to play green and likes to turn cards and likes to enter the red zone. They like to play creatures and attack and block. That there's some level of almost Timmy element to every Magic player, and I think that that is probably even correct. But it's very unfortunate that based on that belief, they feel like they need to go way above and beyond to ensure that that's what the game's about in every single format, even the formats that old timers like me play, just for the enjoyment of having remembering what it felt like to play a format where that wasn't true. Because I assure you, that wasn't always true, and for a lot of years it wasn't true, and that, in my mind, was the glory days, the golden age of Magic, and that's what I try to bring back, and I try to share my enjoyment for that with you. Because I'd like you to, especially players that never got a chance to feel that, I'd like you to have a chance to feel that and see what it's like and see how fun it is when you transform Magic from just a kind of a game of war where best top deck wins, or into a game of poker and chess where you move your pieces on the board and you're constantly planning for the next 3 turns and making those decisions. And I think for the most part, the people who play this or enjoy my channel, I think that they do it because they like those same things as well. At least that's what I hope. So I'm going to show you the deck list I'm using, and then I'll run through a couple of games, and we'll wrap this up. It's a very long video, and it is very talkative. I get that. But I feel like the conversation needed to be had. So here's the deck as I have it. I feel like it's much more tuned. I'm not sure if I had it this way in the last video, but I certainly really, really like this. Is playing out like so nicely. So I actually managed to find room for JVP and Snapcaster, which was nice. I think that they do belong in the deck. I guess Snapcaster is the closest thing to regrowth that you're going to get in blue. It just, although it's certainly not the same, and quite frustrating when you look at a Snapcaster and you're trying to figure out what to do about that winter orb that they just killed or whatever. Anyway, so yeah, so here's a very, very tuned list. I can't really go over the changes, especially as I think I've used most of my discussion time up with you. But basically, I put Tax Rack back in. I cut out like a Braid and some of the other, I cut out like value, like not even value plays, flexible cards that are just not strong enough in a format that's as powerful as this. What I want more of is power plays. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down so you can get the rest of the lands after Volcanic Island is Wasteland, Watery Grave, Windswept Heath, and Wooded Foothills. But basically, I think this has the optimal balance between, a hopefully optimal balance between, you need ways to refill your hand, you need ways to go get your game-winning plays, you need ways to prevent yourself from losing to your opponent's game-winning plays. You've got to have ways to smooth out the draw, and you have to have enough mana to play all that and do all those things. And this feels like pretty close to an optimal version for managing to balance all those competing interests off and still play the way that we want to play. So without getting too much further into it, Stoneforge is gone and so forth. It's one card that I do kind of regret having out and kind of want in here. So if you do have an idea on where it would fit, I'd certainly be interested in entertaining your idea. Since I do have Jete, Shackles, or Feast and Famine and Skull Clamp in here. But on the other hand, there's plenty of times where equipment is not helping me, and more ways to go get equipment that doesn't help me maybe it doesn't deserve a slot, and that was why I took it out. Jace ended up replacing Stoneforge, and the reasoning is that one of the things that the Jace does is it helps provide fuel for Cruise and Dig. And so I think that that's pretty important because, again, these cards are not anywhere near full speed cards like they are in Type 1 where you can play them reliably like within, a turn or two. It's just not happening in this format too often. So you want to be able to provide Cruise and Dig fuel so that when you get to those cards, you can actually do something with them. They are actually in the way of Dark Confidant. So if I were to pull these two cards, you could put in Dark Confidant and Stoneforge, for example, and I think that would be a pretty reasonable swap for these two cards. But I'd rather have the blue cards and have less vulnerability to creature removal, as well as having more ways to force a will early on, and things that I can go fetch with I'm sorry, I'm totally spacing out. Merchant Scroll and Mystical Teachings. So, okay, let's check out some games anyway. So I only have 4 games from earlier this morning, and I just spun through these because they were fun. I think one of them might actually be just a quit. But one of them was really tough, and I didn't want to lose it. I didn't want to play more games and lose it and have it get buried in my game list, because that happens a lot of times. I get these games where I'd really like to show you what happened, but I end up playing so many games afterwards for the fun of it that I end up forgetting and losing the games where they get buried in my playlist. So hoping that wouldn't happen here. So here I am playing against Baral. So the Baral was like a nightmare in 1v1, and he was a nightmare because, hold on a sec, so I'm going to pause this actually. So Brawl was a nightmare to face in 1v1, and he was a nightmare because the format is too underpowered. So the problem with, I did pause, right? Yeah, that's very strange. So one of the problems with underpowering the format, by taking cards like Soul Ring and Mana Crypt out, cards that mono blue has trouble interacting with, it created the rise of mono blue. It allowed that scourge on the game to exist precisely because its natural enemies, stripmine, Soul Ring, Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, things that would cause, Mishra's Workshop and stuff, things that would cause a mono blue player to be tier 2 when they faced it and had no real way to interact with it. They took all those out of the format and made mono blue tier 1 as a result, and made the format fairly miserable as a result. And to the point where this guy, who I would have considered laughable in 1v1 prior to all the changes, in watch, you'll see what happens in this game, was just an absolute terror, right, to deal with, to the point he was banned. All right, so I get to kill his guy early, and I got a tax off early. So on my next turn, I'm able to, I transmute Muddle, and I do this because I don't want my opponent to be able to interact with this turn. And so if I would have cast Merchant Scroll otherwise, but I don't want my opponent to have any way to, because he's a mono blue player, right? So he's going to be sitting on a bunch of counters, and I just don't want to give him that choice. So here my opponent played Rhystic Study, so I'm going to go ahead and cast Jace, because there's only a handful of counters he could have that would stop this, and luckily he is not able to do so. So I go ahead and I actually throw away Yawgmoth's Will. I probably should have thrown away Mox Diamond in hindsight, because playing a Mox Diamond under Heuristic isn't the greatest thing. But I was thinking I'd like to get 2 mana out if possible, so I left it this way. I'm going to tax that land back into my hand over and over, and knowing that he can't really get his commander out and do anything with it as long as there's a Jace. My opponent scooped, so I like how this went. But basically, I'm drawing, what is that, 4 or 5 cards per turn? Anyway, it's just an example of, and there was a perfectly fair hand, honestly, on my part. I don't think I had pretty much anything OP going on out of my hand, and I was still able to beat Baral, who is a pretty gross commander, so that made me happy. All right, so next round I'm playing against Mile the Anima. I make sure I say that with an A, Anima. All right, and my opponent's got an awkward start because he only has green, so he's got only one color. And I managed to draw, I kept his hand because I had Mana Drain, Gilded Lotus, and I had a Force of Will. And I didn't have another blue card though, and I was planning not to Force of Will with Mana Drain. I was hoping I could also draw red if he drew a Soul Ring or something for Vandal Blast. There was a lot of hope in this hand. But it came together when I drew that second island, and my opponent didn't go first turn elf, second turn Maya. I'm not sure why they kept. To be quite honest, this hand is dreadfully slow over there. But because I have Force of Will now and a card that I can afford to get rid of, plus I have Mystical Tutor, which I can use to respond to most plays that my opponent can make, I go ahead and cast Chromatic Lantern here. And on the next turn, we're going to slam the orb because my opponent tapped a bunch of mana. And he's going to go for Selesnya Signet. So I'm just letting all these cards hit because I plan to Vandal Blast eventually. And for now, Winter Orb turned on my Mox Opal, which gave me enough mana to play Gilded Lotus. So for now, I just want to keep developing, and I'm going to worry about disruption later. As long as I have that mana drain up, I'm just waiting for an opportunity. Funny enough, the card I wanted to drain into is already on the table, which is the Lotus. All right, so I'm going to play Thran Dynamo here. Again, just waiting it out, hoping to end a turn Factor Fiction. UTFOFYL. My opponent splits a counterspell with the Sword of Feast and Famine. Well, I definitely want the sword because the sword's going to allow me to completely break the orb in half and also make it excruciatingly difficult for my opponent to recover from out from under a Winter Orb as I'm going after hand over and over. Excuse me. All right, so still hoping to Vandal Blast, but I was kind of waiting to see exactly how this was going to play out. On this turn, I finally Vandal Blast because I'm planning to untap all my lands and I want to maximize the value from Sword of Feast and Famine. Opponent tries to Path to Exile and I Stoic it. He knows I have the Stoic, so I assume he's just clearing the way for another removal spell or some other play. I Stoic because, mana draining 1-drop, not so good. And it was more important for me to hit him with the sword than it would have been to, I'm going to pause right here, than it would have been to get the land from Path to Exile, especially since it comes into play tapped under Winter Orb. So the end of my opponent's turn here, I go ahead and tap out to play a Dig Through Time. I messed up a little bit. I should have exiled Mana Confluence and left Vandal Blast in my graveyard. You want to leave cards that you can Yawgmoth's Will later or Snapcaster back into play. So you also, on the other hand, want to leave lands for Crucible. But Mana Confluence is not a land that I don't care too much if I'm unable to, return a Mana Confluence to play. So that's just there to smooth out the early game, and we're already past that with Chromatic Lantern. So I should have exiled that and left Vandal Blast as a potential replay, but I didn't. So I go ahead and dig, and this is incidentally why I don't. I go ahead and tap out knowing that I'm going to untap my lands into the orb. So from here, presented with these piles, I believe I select Cryptic Command, and I think JVP is what I end up taking. Forbid would have also been very reasonable because I've basically got this game won and I just need to hold the line. But I figured that if I take Jace, I can actually do, okay, so there's a land I could recur with Crucible if I find one. So I figured if I take Jace, so I'm going to tap out again, trying to maximize value out of the sword. Anyway, Jace will allow me to recast Factor Fiction or Dig Through Time, either of which should be a winner. All right, so my opponent tries to Swords to Plowshares my guy. I'm going to go ahead and Cryptic it. I still have mana for Mana Drain up, but I don't want to Mana Drain a 1-mana spell yet again. I'm going to bash and steal another card from my opponent's hand and pass. all my lands untapped. At the end of my opponent's turn, I'm going to go ahead and tap Thran Dynamo on a land and cast Mystical Teachings. And then I'll probably tap one of these and cast potentially Mystical Tutor as well. Although I'm not sure exactly what I would Teachings for. To be honest, at this point with him at 14, I'd probably just go get a Counterspell again and just win mathematically. Or I might have fetched a set up a Mind Twist play. But truth of the matter was that game was already over. So, all right. So lastly, I have this game against Nash, and this ends up being an extremely difficult game. So hopefully we don't bug out. So I take a mulligan early because my hand just wasn't. It was very fair and not very fast. I'm playing against Azusa, and I do draw this land tax, which is very nice. So I go ahead and actually play a first turn expedition map off a crypt. Normally you like to hold crypt until you need it. Oh, there goes my opponent tutoring again. Anyway, so my opponent fetched up a Ramanap excavator. So right. I forgot green players get 2 Crucible Worlds. Everyone else gets 1. So the reason though that I played the expedition map there was because it would allow me to spend 1 mana that I wouldn't be able to spend otherwise, and that mana efficiency was worth it for me. So here, because I'm worried about Ramanap, I go ahead and fetch a stripmine, and I'm like, as long as he doesn't have crop rotation, which is, basically a tutor card that blows you out, I should be good. So I stripmine during upkeep, and he has crop rotation. Ouch. So I'm going to force the will that, because if I don't, I think I'm in worse shape. But now I have nothing. I have no gas. And my opponent's about to get Ramanap, get the forest back that he just sacrificed. So like this isn't looking too good, and I think we're gonna bug out. Oh, there's no way I had a top here. This is incredibly disappointing. This was a great game. No way. Are we really gonna bug? We are gonna bug out. None of this happened. Wow, how disappointing. Unbelievable. This game came down to the wire. It was like 15 turns or 20 turns or something. It was a great game. And funny enough, it was all based on the power of all these search cards, which allowed my opponent to craft. He also got, I think he got Green Sun Zenith. He got the card that really made it hard, which was Birthing Plod. And anyway, it allowed my opponent to craft a position that would have won the game and should have won the game, except he made a very slight error, and it was just enough. It was just enough of a gap where I was able to basically clear his board out, so I didn't lose to Birthing Pod and buy some time. And I was making desperation plays like I had. So what actually happened in this game is I drew nothing but mana for all the way down until I was the next 10 cards. They were nothing but mana. It was just mana, 10 cards deep, and I had to play the whole game. With just mana and my commander, and I was like, and a Yawgmoth's Will. So at one point I sacked all my artifact mana and threw him at his face, and then untapped and then willed and replayed all my artifact mana, and couldn't quite. I came up a little bit short, and then he was able on his turn to play Scavenging Ooze, start gaining a bunch of life back. And then he played the 2/4 that lets you play lands off the top and get a life whenever a land comes into play. And because of Pod and that, he was able to actually kind of like work his deck so that he continuously hit lands, and he ended back up at 14 from 4 or 3. I had him at 4 at one point. So it was this crazy back and forth game, and unfortunately, I apologize, you're not going to get to see it. But it was a great game. If you're watching, I hope we get to play more, because it was absolutely well played and extremely challenging matchup. So anyway, that's all I've got for this video. It is a little quick, and I know it's short on gameplay, but I feel like this is a conversation that had to happen. Somebody posted, for example, on my channel this miles long paragraph about how disappointed they were, and I totally get it. I totally understand that, but I'm just, like I said, I think the format sucks. I think the ban list sucks. I think it's super unfriendly towards my playstyle. It's extremely hostile, and it's become so hostile that I cannot enjoy engaging in the format anymore. And if you don't like it and you're not having fun doing it, then what are you doing it for? And that's what I asked myself, and realized that at that point there really was no reason to keep going in that format. So anyway, tell me what you think. Do you think there's a bias? Do you agree with the kind of things that I was saying? Do you agree but you feel like it doesn't care? Do you disagree and not care? Like, there's a lot of options in here. There's a wide area. You could be anywhere on that spectrum. You could agree with some points and disagree with you could agree with the premise and disagree with the conclusion, or vice versa. So I'm really interested in what kind of conversation this actually might generate, and what your take on it is. And I mean, if anyone has a interest in posting a comment or video that disputes it or supports it, or maybe nobody cares and I wasted my time. Hopefully I didn't. Hopefully I didn't waste your time. And above all, thank you very much for watching my video. I'll get back to the gameplay after this. And again, I appreciate your support. I'll see you next time.